All right, so this episode of Pop Culture POV point of view is a little bit in the vein of Real Housewives of New York in general, and also still taking some time and some moment to understand or question, for that matter, Ebony K Williams and her contribution to the series, the way I feel about her not being able to have a reunion. I mean, the cast in general, sure, but the odd, complex, and interesting energy how there wasn't a reunion in the vein of it being a boring season, I suppose. And just kind of like talking about the series, talking about the numbers being bad. And these are all just my perspectives and my point of view. And so I'll start by saying where it is that my adoration for the series is and begins. Like most people, I loved it from the beginning. You know, it was such a great show. I always look to Jill Zarin. While nowadays, the taglines are a little more witty and fun and unique, or whatever. They're like meant to be on a shirt at some point or a merch, you know, on a mug or something. I still to this day felt real. Like I liked watching it and her saying like I run with a fabulous circle. Like something about that was just so simple, yet it told me exactly what we needed to know about, you know, her and even like what the show was about. To this day, I don't think Jill Zarin's tagline gets enough credit as it deserves. I want to say that I remember enjoying all those big moments of, you know, the Countess being so much more astute in the way she carried herself than the way she required Bethany to carry for her, and the being in the car and please call me by this, don't call me by this, and there was such a charm in that. Even, you know, and Luann's always been that way. Excuse me, the Countess has always had that. She's always had that. Um, you know, I think very highly of myself. She still has a nervous laugh on a lot of occasions too. We've seen that throughout the seasons, and I think that's the perfect mix. I think that's why Luann really works, because while one hand she loves herself more than anybody, which I think is great. You should. I come from a huge background of not being confident and being turned down and being humble is the way, and the humble is the only way to, you know, succeed, and you know, bullshit to that, because you should always just have a default to be humble, but you should also not allow yourself to not walk in the world and be really into yourself and really focused on the contributions that you have and who you are and who you can be. And so for Luann, the reason I think it works is because she has such a great confidence. She's delightfully herself, but there are a lot of seasons I've watched where she still has this nervous laugh and a nervous energy, and that two sides of the coin is what really makes me like her quite a bit. Obviously on the show, the GOAT will always be Bethany, even to say that when Bethany returned in season 7 and then came back for, was it 5 seasons, and when she left it was the hardest, it still doesn't mean she wasn't great at this, you know. And in fact, in many ways, I remember when she left, it was like she could have came back, and you know, they offered her a delicious amount of money, and she, you know, moved forward with her life, which is also good too. But it would have been nice for her last season to be a little stronger. Felt like her last season wasn't as exciting. But then again, who's to say you need an exciting Housewives reality TV storyline when you're doing other great contributions to, you know, the Be Strong Foundation, this, that, and the other. Cast members, there's been so many in and out, and I'm gonna kind of give. I don't want to like stop down on everyone. I particularly did think Heather Thompson was great. I think Heather is interesting, and Heather's where sort of a direction we should go. This show sort of started to arc in one way, maybe always, but definitely in the middle, where we got a big kick out of women who were, I mean, they were reality stars, but they were doing this show where you would get the sense of like, oh, it's an Upper East Side woman, but then we're going to show the goofiest part of her. And while I think that's good, I think that can't be your one trick pony situation, your one note. You have to be able to kind of give more. And it seemed like they started to get to that. The reason I bring up Heather and then quickly went to that talking point was because I like the years you have a Heather and a Carol Radswell, you know, people who aren't willing to just do the goofy stuff. Again, makes sense to have your what you would think in your mind, Upper East Sider, they're stuffy, they're this, that, and the other, but then turns out Sonia Morgan's goofy. Sonia's one of my favorites. But when that becomes one note and you don't have anything to counterbalance it, like a Heather who's just like, not what? And a Carol, like, excuse me? You need people that are sort of already winning and not as enchanted with the show. We have a lot of cast members on The Real Housewives of New York that seem to be enchanted with the show. I always feel like the best cast members are kind of like Bethany, where sure, it made her, but after it made her, it's like she wasn't enchanted with the show. She was happy to be there, sure, earn her check, all the stuff, respect to Bravo, all of the things. But we now seem to have cast members that are too I was gonna say groupie, too thirsty, to be on the show. I liked cast members. I thought it was more well balanced when you have people could say forever that Heather was not interesting, but it's like, no, she actually was. I felt like she was significant in her life. I felt like she was balancing motherhood and marriage. Like, I felt like there's a place for that on this show. Anyways, I guess sometimes the people who, in my opinion, hold their heads a little higher and to a higher esteem as far as what they bring to the table, they sometimes don't make good for this type of show, because this show is sort of a show where the cast member that doesn't have as much going on and wants to just play around and be goofy and show their ass, so to speak, they seem to do really well. But I do like that side of it too. I like Sonia Morgan. Why do I always call her Sonia Moore? It's my love for Kenya Moore and Sonia. I love Sonia Morgan. What do I think about... I'm going to get to these last two seasons in a moment, but what do I think about Ramona? Ramona, I think that even if we like, let's see, with Ramona, I feel like even if we like her, I don't know. Okay, so there's a sentence that gets tossed around with Ramona all the time, which is, well, even if you don't like her, she's necessary for the show. And to that, I say, is she though? I mean, there are plenty of people who you could find with not necessarily the greatest of behaviors, and from her particular walk in life, where she's from, the type of person she hangs around, I'm trying to find a word. Wouldn't be privilege, but the life she lives. You could find others. And another thing is, it gets a little worrisome to me, even if she wasn't within bad behavior, that let's say she was the most genuine person. It gets worrisome to me when you give somebody 13 seasons for really doing, it is a job, I get that, but really not doing much. And you keep stating, well, she's necessary because she's good TV, because she's a mess or she's a bitch. After 13 seasons, you have got to maybe make some type of change. And the change that I will welcome, as far as, I'll give both examples. If you were to keep her on the show, I think there's been this thing where they keep trying to do, well, we'll have on this side who Ramona is, and on the other side we'll have this complete different character like a Leah, and they'll clash because they're different. That does nothing for me. Nothing. Zero. And I'm going to get to my concept of why Leah is not necessarily, she's, what is it called when they say it's, the projection for her was very high, and she, we didn't get our return. Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. But if you're going to keep Ramona on, you do one of two things. Take her to a place of putting her as a friend of, just to let some fire excite her and know that, like, this is not a given. I mean, imagine you already start as sort of a privileged human being and a really mean to, your staff and et cetera, and then you keep rewarding that person by putting them on television, sending them to Turks and Caicos, sending them to all these travel experiences and press and PR, and making them feel so good. It's sort of a dangerous thing to do, in the vein of, she is just a reality star. I love a reality star like the next person, but she is just a reality star. So I think you need to maybe look at taking that down a notch, and also, yes, keeping Sonia as a full-time, taking Ramona down to a part-time. But if you were to do, and Ramona would be wonderful doing a part-time role. That's the funny thing. She would do wonderful. She'd get maybe a little bit frustrated, that she's not, the OG of the season anymore, but she would do very fantastic still, I think. But another route you could take is don't do Leah and her walk in life versus Ramona. They don't mix, they clash. Woo, what's going to happen? Because that's just a matter of this or that. What type of polarizing, clashing experience for reality TV doesn't make sense when the two people aren't really going to be together and agree on anything? That doesn't necessarily, to me, make for good TV. What you need to do is cast somebody who is within Ramona's world and her mindset. Cast somebody who walks in the spaces that Ramona walks in, but doesn't like her, and they're still both the same. They both are, questionable with their politics, questionable with the way they treat people, questionable with their antics, up on the Upper East Side, and, questionable with their wearings of masks and stuff of that nature. Do two people that are both in that world, and find a cast member who necessarily is like Ramona. Oh yeah, we've never thought highly of her. And that to me is a better contrast, because then you have two of the same. It's like Leah arguing with somebody older than her. It's like that seems so uninteresting to me. You put Leah with somebody else in her, like similar to her, and they don't get along, then I'm like, okay, good. We have two people that potentially know the same things, and they're not getting along, so let's get to the root of it. But you simply saying, well, you're old, so that's why you're boring, or you're young and dumb and downtown, sludge Leah, as Ramona sort of implies, that it's just, where's the fun in watching that? So if you wanted to have contrast, have the contrast of having people in those people's same worlds and not agreeing with the way the person does it. Because now all you have is one type of life versus the other type of life. Are you team downtown, or are you team, Upper East Side? That's all you really do, and that gets boring. Leah, to me, was very lackluster on the season that Bethany left, and the only reason that she did do well, I think, is because Bethany left. I mean, that's really what it is. And I did not find her that interesting. I was first brought to her attention. I would listen to her podcast, the one that she had with Laura Stiles. Laura Stiles is a radio host out of New York City, originally from Los Angeles. And she's on a top hip-hop station in New York. So I had first heard of the two of them and their podcast together because they, at the time I was working at a production for Complex Media, and Complex has this big convention called the Complex Con, and there was the one, I think it was like in Long Beach at the time. I didn't go to the event. My job was based out of New York, but the event itself, you'd see the pictures and the Instagram and all that kind of stuff. And this person named Leah was basically, I only knew her through, oh, okay, Laura Stiles has a booth for her podcast, Improper Etiquette, I think it was called. And who is this other host? Oh, it's a girl named Leah. I guess she's got a clothing line. Very young, streetwear, this, that, and the other. And Leah does represent a lot of that. Leah represents, like, a very authentic part of New York City, which is great. But I would say that her choices on the show, she just hasn't been very interesting. It's as if she's done the exact wrong thing to do. She should have, in my opinion, she should have continued to be the badass that she's always been and tell all those really great stories, be the person she is. And instead, she sort of played herself in a way and started becoming a caricature of herself. I mean, the plastic surgery that people have issues with, I don't necessarily have issues with, but the fact that she got the plastic surgery and people are already seeing and sort of finding that, like, she's spinning out, not spinning out of control, but it doesn't give you the best personality when you fawn over this job. Like, the fact that she cut her podcast, which in my mind, if you have the luxury of having Bravo also throwing some money at you and helping your fashion line. I mean, I was not into the name of the fashion line. Like, it didn't work for me. I mean, it's also geared towards women, but especially she was about 38 years old. It felt like something like a 26-year-old should be doing. Obviously, we all got to grow. I get that. But to me, it was odd that instead of putting the pedal to the metal on building up everything she's doing with the fashion line, with the podcast, whatever, and really maximizing the opportunity. It's like by season 2, she's like, oh, I quit my podcast. Most people would not quit your podcast. Most people would add to it, because once you're off that show, you all those eyeballs, you should be maximizing and adding up the scenario. So again, I just didn't find her very interesting in the season that she was very much fond and adored over. I was not, but that's okay, because that was also to me not a good season. The whole season being, these women are stuffy, Leah's not stuffy. It's like, well, you've got 2 different walks of life. Like you can't tell me Leah's not stuffy. Put her next to somebody who speaks her language, and put them next to somebody that speaks their language. The notion just that they're going to call her, downtown this, that, and the other, and she's going to call them stuffy Upper East Siders, it's like we're not really getting anything compelling out of that. So she really didn't have that great of a season. So when the next season came and everyone's like, oh, she's not that great anymore, I was like, well, she wasn't really that great to begin with. It was just really, Bethany was gone, she stepped in, and the edit, certainly favored her. But yeah, if I was a Leah fan, let's say, as I was before when she did Improper Etiquette, I listened to many of the episodes because I'm a big Laura Stiles fan. When she did that show, she I thought I seen a little more potential there. Sometimes it feels like the way she works is like she knows that she has a contract for like 6 years or something, or she's set to do it for 6 years. To me, I think you got to play it year by year by year and keep enhancing who you are. It's like almost as if she's a little too hype about this opportunity. And I guess I would too. It's a game changer. The money's wonderful. You go on many great adventures and you're on television. It's kind of the best of all worlds. But if she's more in the vein of already getting a little hectic being as young as she is, under 40 years old, and the plastic surgery starting now, what does like a season 5 of hers look like for the Housewives of New York? In fact, here's a fun thing. She brings her sister on all the time, which might be the one reason that I think that she is interesting. Bring your sister on who's significantly less interesting, and then you're interesting. But contrary to that, I think her mother Bunny is actually very interesting. Like Bunny to me should be cast on the show and just like suddenly in the background be like, oh, here's my daughter Leah. Bunny to me had a perspective, had a point of view, knew what she was talking about, questioned everything. She made sense for the show. And maybe those are things that Leah could look into as she grows and finds out, oh my God, I stopped like being interesting of a person, because we know Leah's an interesting person because she ran in the city, New York City of the time. Like we know she knows stuff, but maybe it is a little hard for her to arc all of that for a Housewives audience. Remember she did the appearance on Love and Hip Hop years ago. Maybe she always secretly wanted to be on a Love and Hip Hop instead for her youth and for her the way she speaks, this, that, and the other. Maybe she felt more comfortable there. So maybe she's having a hard time trying to figure out what fits here. But the concept of her just with the plastic surgery and the wow, someone has an impression on my wardrobe, but then like you're sort of like showcasing your wardrobe to get it to have an opinion. I've always thought that if you want to dress silly, dress silly. But then don't get mad at me because you're frustrated that I'm not saying that looks odd. You're welcome to wear whatever you want. She struck me as look at me, I'm dressed like this, but don't say nothing because you got to let me have my individuality. It's something like that is really what I felt. Am I wrong? Could I be wrong about how I perceive Leah? Maybe not though. And hopefully if she gets more seasons, who knows if she is going to get them. I would say that I would imagine that a lot of housewives in other franchises find her very underwhelming, like significantly underwhelming. And then she seems like one of the housewives that takes to Twitter a lot to kind of arc things. And so that's like not really truth. It's just how you decide to arc it. But I just imagine a lot of other housewives don't enjoy what she brings to the franchise. It has nothing to do with them, but I just imagine that. That's just me. Who knows? Maybe she won't get another season or a friend of or whatever. Not that anyone's trying to stop her succeeding, but we hope that she is as interesting as she once was on improper etiquette, on Millionaire Matchmaker, on Love and Hip Hop, or whatever. The new caricature she's dipped into, and playing with the confessionals isn't seeming to work for a lot of people. But it didn't work for me the first time. And then the fact that this next season, once Ebony K Williams came on and it became the season that no one really enjoyed, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, not only is this a problem, not a problem, but also now Leah's not as interesting. No, she never really was. She never really was. Not saying she can't be, but she never really was. Okay, this is not about her. Let's move on to Ebony K Williams coming onto the show, and the impact of that, and just even the frustration that there is no reunion. Now, there is no reunion for anybody, but there's no reunion specifically for this season, and it seems to not make sense. My first concept of Ebony, comment rather, is going to be even beforehand. All the talks leading up to it, you know, Bershawn coming onto the show. There was all this conversation about Alicia Corals coming onto the show, and maybe Real Housewives of New York being New York, such as was Sex and the City, and, you know, showcasing just one particular lifestyle and one particular neighborhood and one particular type of person sort of, you know, became some chatter that the viewership was kind of like, this doesn't make sense. You know, the 7 years I've lived in New York, it's like, yeah, it does not make sense in any neighborhood. This doesn't really make sense. So I was welcoming to the change and the adjustments, and maybe a place for them to grow. The one thing to note, being frustrated that there was not a reunion is something I can definitely say. I am frustrated that there was no reunion, but to be frustrated with the season is tough to say wholeheartedly, just because they did film coming out of a pandemic, and one of the enriched experiences that you could have with filming that kind of show, all the franchises for sure, but specifically that, is that whole, I mean, again, I mentioned it earlier in this episode, is, you know, Jill Zarin, like, you know, I run with a fabulous circle of friends. Like, when you can't in your show have them all, you know, being amongst restaurants and different shows in the city because of the pandemic, and they got to go do things like go to Salem and make like 3 episodes out of it for like a haunted house, you know, witches thing. You know, it's fun and it's cute, and Sonia Morgan definitely leans into all that stuff, but it's hard to say, wow, this episode wasn't a season rather. This season wasn't that compelling. It's like they really couldn't do some of the things they wanted to do. Everything did have to be broken down into a dinner. Everything did have to be broken down into going to Ramona's and let's get everyone together. There really wasn't a lot to do based on the pandemic. So that's one thing that's interesting. Now, my thoughts on Ebony. So my first recollection of Ebony was years ago with her work on Black Hollywood Live, of course. And then knowing that she had done her time on the on Fox News, and then the books that she wrote, I knew her basically through all of that. And I'm not saying that I was impressed or not impressed. I was just more like, oh, cool, you know. Seeing that Black Hollywood Live was so attached with AfterBuzz and being in the AfterBuzz studios all the time, I was like, oh, cool, that's awesome that this person is going to get a chance to jump onto Housewives. That's like a really big jump. That's great, but not taken away from just all of the other works. You know, one of the works that I saw of hers that I really enjoyed, and I was like, oh, she really does what she wants, stands on her own 2 feet, and doesn't really, she doesn't really care what you think, is when she did Revolt TV State of the Culture. Because even within that show, this was with her being on a panel with Remy Ma, with Joe Budden, with Jinx, and they all sort of would talk about the hot topics of the time. And I know there was a lot of people who felt like maybe she didn't fit that demographic. See, she's the type that's going to fit where she wants to fit, and you're going to follow. And that's what I really like about her. So I watched literally every episode she ever did on State of the Culture. So I kind of had that headspace. And even with that headspace, because I'm a big fan of the Joe Budden podcast, I nearly never miss an episode. I was like, oh, okay, well, she did good on this show. She did good on that show. I'm familiar with her book. Boom and boom. But is she still going to fit? Like, is this going to be the right fit, And I got to say, as soon as she hit that Central Park episode and she knew the assignment, as we say, is like, I was like, she's actually really great. And then for it to be turned around throughout the year as she became somebody that weighed the series down or had an agenda, I just don't see it. I really don't see it. And I think the equation that I could have to it immediately, as an aside real quick, it's like when you are amongst a heteronormative scenario, being in the suburbs or whatever, and every sentence you say, people around you can make it like, oh, well, why does it have to be a gay thing? Da 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 da. And it's like, because everything is in the view and the lens that I'm going to walk in life, So there's not necessarily anything to offend or affect you, but it is something that is beyond necessary. This is what makes a place like New York City really work well for me, because New York City, all of those things sort of blend. Now, the sad thing is, on this TV show, they didn't all blend. But I'm giving an example of how I can't say that I thought Ebony came with an agenda to get the other women when we see it in other walks of life too. We see it in other scenarios where don't make it a this thing or don't make it a that thing. It's uniquely for all of us, and it's like people's experiences aren't all the same, and yet you're trying to tell somebody to turn themselves down. I didn't like. The other issue is, even if Ebony did, let's say, put it on a little bit, let's just go with that as an example. My thought is, why at some point there has to be acknowledged that the production is what chooses to follow what stories. I really feel like there is a little bit of a dropping the ball that can be said about production, to know that this is going to get a rise out of people. There are going to be the people who have watched this show for years and years and years, and they're going to feel like Ebony's causing mess, which is such a disgusting comment, because she's not causing a problem. Ramona's reacting and she's causing the mess, but okay. And I think having the knowledge that something like that could have happened, you could have still had all these polarizing moments, but I think the disservice was we didn't have enough moments in the show across the board where the ladies got to connect, where it wasn't just a situation where she where Ebony was speaking and people in the cast didn't react to her in a favorable way, or they felt it was too polarizing or whatever, or can't we just let it be a nice easygoing day, which then puts Ebony in a weird situation, because she's like, well, I was making it an easy day, but damn, I just wanted to speak on what's important. So in that regard, and on top of where everyone's coming out of a pandemic at that time, everyone's coming out of just a really interesting year as far as these issues were coming to the forefront, and you're going to try to put that all on one cast member just does not sit well with me. Whether I think Ebony's great for the show. Listen, maybe Ebony should be not taken, like, I don't know if she even wants to come back, but like added to something different. The series on Amazon Prime just started called Harlem. Bevy Smith is in that. I think maybe you do, and now specifically, I believe we see that Ebony is living in Harlem. Like, why don't we do a new reality, a new spinoff series, and just focus on the world that she lives amongst, and like that way we don't have to force something that's not seeming to fit for everybody. But then again, that doesn't really do a service either, because it's like, why the part where I'm like, the frustration is, why can Ramona be so badly behaved year after year after year, but it quote unquote works, and then Ebony didn't get to act any kind of way, and then it was sort of termed as like, well, it didn't work. And then at that point too, it gets frustrating, because like the tightrope that she has to walk is really quite a tightrope. There was the going around that she had been at a comic show and she came on stage. I believe that was a comic show that she was a host on the bill, so her name was necessarily already in the forefront of the situation. She was playing. I mean, when you're in a comic club, like people play. But if you wanna arc it as a thing of like, oh, she was disrespectful to a comic and she was being a heckler that gone too far. I don't know that that's the fairest assessment. In fact, I did watch an interview with the comic, with the comedian, and I believe he's already trying to do a show with her. I mean, that's just like a want thing. Who knows if it's going to happen? But like I said, I don't know that she even wants to come back. I would prefer that Bravo find something that's like, let's have you in your own vehicle and you charge out strong, assemble a cast that works for you. Yes, it's still reality TV, so it's still got to be polarizing, still got to be challenging, but like, this is not in anyone's best health or best interest. In the event that it was a question, oh yeah, I would be all the way for like, you know what, screw that, put her back on the show. You know, Ebony deserves to be back on the show again. But again, I don't know if that's what she wants. Like, who would want to go through all that? What an embarrassing experience the network sort of puts you through. You decide that I'm going to do the show. I'm going to be authentic to me. Sure, the issues are kind of hard. The other cast members really arc it to something different. And I like Luann. I like Sonia. Ramona I could stand to do without. But Leah seems a bit boring. Heather I liked. I'd love to see Heather again, but it seems like Heather's not going to come back at all. But just for it to sort of flop the way it did and it to be deemed as like the least interesting season, I always say, this season was actually very good. The season with Leah and Ebony and Sonia, Luann and Ramona, and should have been Heather and Bershawn. Should have been good, and it was decent. It was not that bad. The season before, however, with Tinsley and Dorinda, I feel like we're still in a huge need of Dorinda to come back. But the concept of this last most current season being a problem, no, I don't think it was. I think the season that was a problem was the season where Leah was sort of the star. Like, that season to me was a very, very boring season. Like, there was not a lot that had went on. So yeah, I mean, ultimately I'll have my critique for Leah, but I want Leah to find her sea legs and and find what works and feels the best to do this long term. It feels like Leah's doing this show in a way that the caricature that she's becoming is not sustainable. So there's that. And wouldn't be good for her as a mother. You know, you want her to be the best mother. So that's something to be worried about, I suppose. Ebony, if she wanted to do a show again, this show again, and kind of get that whole like, well, listen, I didn't get to get my side of things at the reunion, so I want to do another season. But listen, I don't know if she has the power to do so, but I would love it if, you know what, take your Real Housewives of New York, and I'm out of here. You know, hopefully I'm out of here and they arc you to another series. That's what I think. Now, but we don't know. There's always, I try not to listen to these other podcasters because they really feel like they know everything, and they significantly don't. But if she wants to come back, I say come back. If she doesn't want to come back, I say don't come back. But I don't think that the excuse and the move was to eliminate a reunion. It looks really in poor taste. We've had reunions for everything. And I think the real shady thing about it all is, if there was an investigation, if they were trying to preserve Ramona because they felt like Ebony had some juggernauts to lay on the table. And again, I'm speaking for now. I don't know in 3 months if more comes to the surface. But from this point of view right now, even if all that was available, you have the final cut on that edit. So you could have at least still given a show that sufficed a lot of the questions and then sort of kept it protected. Sure, each cast member could say what they could say, but they're all under contract, so they can't say too much, you know. So it really was in the best interest for Bravo to just do a freaking reunion. I guess the part that devastates me is there's a very real scenario that Ebony, every day that goes on, she by walking that tightrope, could get more and more frustrated, make an error or two along the way, because, again, Ramona could act with the worst behavior. She don't have to walk a tightrope ever. Ebony, yes, she went on stage with the comic, and yes, she's probably going to say something in an interview, and she's probably going to do this, probably going to do that. But how would you act if you went on that show knowing that this is a vehicle for me to do a season, do a reunion, take that momentum, and keep my career going to the next level? The fact that all of that might be taken away from her does not sit well with me. We should have seen, and we saw a glimpse of it for 1 nanosecond, but we should have seen the work she does on Holding Court. I think it's called Holding Court with Dustin Ross, who I love Dustin Ross's work from the Friend Zone podcast, and he's also in The Skinny. And so it's like, I think if she did act up, and I would be interested to interview her. Not during all this. No. Wait for all this to end. Once it ends and she makes her final decision, or the network makes their decision, or production makes their decision, and it's the next chapter, then I would like to interview her. Right now, I want no parts. I want no parts. I don't want the juicy story. I want everyone to be favorable, because I don't want the show to be tarnished. Real Housewives of New York is like a fun show for people to watch. Think of all the dialogue, all the quotes that we've had over the years. And furthermore, I want Ebony to have a shining vehicle. Like, shit, put her on Girl Chat. What's it called? Group Chat. I don't know. The show that is on where with Giselle and Portia. Like, even if it was something lighthearted, like, give her something, because it is just so challenging if this is something that is nothing's given, right? And obviously, if you're hired to do the show, you do the show, and that's kind of it. What you can make of it is hopefully what you can make of it. But there's a part of me, if I got this show or a show, and I went down this this journey, and it got taken from me, and I didn't even really do anything crazy, I would be a little bit mad. And this is not based on who she was or the quote unquote agenda that some people try to say that she had on the show, which I don't believe she did. I believe she was just in a world where she and her experience was married into people around her not being familiar with the experience. I think it was really simple, if you ask me. And by the way, that's New York City. Like, I've lived there for 7 years. Like, you're always around it. It's not that hard. And the way they made it harder than it had to be was corny. Very corny, if you ask me. But in regards to getting off the show itself, Real Housewives of New York, I do always have a part in me that, specifically because I've worked in broadcast for so long, it's like, when you do a project, it's always some of them become limited, and then some of them become those projects that you go on and they lead to this, to this, to this, to this. So it's a bit challenging. Like, if you were to think about another show, let's just skip over here for a moment. There was something very, very challenging that happened on one of the seasons of Drag Race. I think it was season 12. Well, all those cast members, once they get that phone call and they get on the show and they know it's a life changer, or it could be. And I'm not going in details, but on this particular season, something happened where the show sort of got completely, as the show was airing, re-edited. Okay, check that out. Season 12 Drag Race, a whole season re-edited because of something really unmentionable. So then you have that, and that cast member also, while the show started airing, is when the pandemic started. So you have just picture this, a whole group of cast members who have worked their however many years it took to get to this place and to get casted on this show, and how many audition tapes and how many ensembles they've put together and wardrobe, and they finally get on the show to sort of get that payoff, just similar to where I feel Ebony deserves. She gets on the show, this should lead to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. For all we know, she should be making Candy Burris money in like 3 years. This is sort of what we know she has availability to do, and she will still do. God, I not so much enjoy Ebony on the show as much as I think this was just such a load of shit, But I do like her though too. Anyways, on this particular season of Drag Race, they made all of these changes, and within all of these changes, it turned into the cast members never got to tour. They never sort of got to make that money back. And I felt like the season 12 Drag Race cast always had the raw end of the deal. None of it's a given, but when you get casted for these programs, you want to use that opportunity to maximize and to take it to the next level. There will always be a part of me that feels like, what the heck, Bravo, and what a you could look at it as a passive thing, but it wasn't. It was a passive aggressive thing to not identify why you didn't do a reunion. There should have been no reason. If Ramona didn't want to do the reunion, you address that next season or you cut her next season. If Ebony didn't want to do it because there was maybe something deeper, maybe there was some investigations that warranted for her not to speak, then fine. You don't have to have her on the reunion either. You could have Luann speak to her experience. You could have Leah speak to her experience. You had to give us a completion of it, whether the numbers were good or not. Didn't like that. It did suck. And I still like Housewives of New York. I always say, I've said before, 2 cast members they should look at is Amber Sabathia, who's an actual housewife of CC Sabathia, who was a Yankee. Amber Sabathia, she runs with that cool crowd, Angie Martinez. She's of the age. She does a little bit of good charitable work and is young and fun, and it doesn't get more authentic than being married to a Yankee, raising kids, and the whole thing. And Amber Sabathia, I believe, is 40 years old. Totally fits the bill. If you want to go the more fashionable route and you want to go a route that really should work, because then you have the best of all worlds. She's young enough to go toe to toe with the Leah type, because Leah's only claim to fame a lot of times is just that she's younger. Okay, put Olivia Palermo in there, and now you have somebody who, Leah does not go toe to toe with Olivia Palermo as far as fashion, look, etiquette, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen what the dismissiveness that Olivia Palermo can give on The City on MTV years ago, and now she's only older and more successful. Like, she is the perfect fit. Rachel, you could tell, somebody that everyone should be looking at as well. Obviously Bevy Smith wants no parts of it. She has no parts of wanting to get anyone together, but it should be interesting, and I hope the casting makes sense. Those are some of the people I would think of. I would love to see Carol Radswell back. She's not going to come back. I would love to see Heather come back. She's not going to come back. But we've got to make a change opposed to doing the same show. I'm a huge Sonia Morgan fan, but if it just is the same note, it's got to change. Like, we have got to find other things. Ramona being like, oh, she's so necessary because she's polarizing. You know how many shitty people there are? Find another one. If Ramona is becoming this challenging, it's always funny to hear that Jill Zarin is accused for being so tough with production, and then it's like, why does Jill Zarin not get to come back, in theory, but like a Ramona does? Bring Jill Zarin back. Yeah, that's who we want. That's who everyone wants. And I know that a lot of the judgment probably is based on everyone seeing the streaming, the Peacock network, to see if the Ultimate Girls Trip, if like Jill Zarin, does really well in the ratings, stuff like that. But sometimes you just got to be bold and say, our show is falling to shit. Let's make sure we put everyone where they need to be. Demote Ramona if that's what's the move. Keep Ebony full-time if that's the move. Give Ebony a spinoff if that's the move. Tell Leah it's been nice knowing you if that's the move, and it is the move. I'm kidding. And then just kind of like start over, because of all the franchises, it's one of the best ones. So hopefully it has more legs. RHONY, yeah, Ronnie. Real Housewives of New York. Hope that all the cast members could find their way. This was just a bit of a conversation about the series. This has been Pop Culture POV. If you want to support me, it's the YouTube channel is youtube.com/randomlyRJ Jr. And the other one is youtube.com/Ronnie Media Page. And the Patreon is patreon.com/randomlyRJ Jr. There is a $3, an $11, a $6, and a $25 tier if you want to like show it some love and help production. Thinking about all of the work that gets put into the project. So much of it is free of charge. And my point of view, that's why the show's called Pop Culture Point of View, is I don't sit in the space of, oh, you're not going to believe this, and I've got the breaking news of what Ebony really said, and I'm going to expose Leah, and I'm going to expose Luann. Like, I don't really do that. I try to keep it as a really fun, almost like from the old school, like a fun broadcast moment. And that's what I try to do. And I hope that it's enjoyable. So if it is enjoyable, show it some love on some of those platforms. Okay. And until then, I'll tell you what, if the Real Housewives of New York, the next season doesn't get a reunion, I will step in and do it for a fraction of, no, I would not do it a fraction. I would do it for double the amount that Andy Cohen does the reunion. So if you just double the amount. You could have me do the reunion. I could give my 2 cents and tell Leah, like, Leah, this is what we need to do. Let's build some strategy. You know what you've been missing, Leah, is strategy. Let's try for some strategy. Ebony, okay, I liked what you did. Boom and boom. Sonia, okay, listen, we know that you're drunk. We could be drunk tomorrow. Let's find something new. You know, I'd have some really good viewpoints, and I think, a fraction. I was going to sell myself short. Are you kidding me? Double the price. Double Andy Cohen's price, and maybe I'll do it. Anyways, Pop Culture POV, popculturepointofview.com. I will talk to you later.